He waited until the snow was falling. He waited until the tree was lit. And then he handed her the envelope. Layla thought it was a deed to a vacation home or a trust fund for their unborn child. She was wrong. Inside wasn't a gift. It was a dissolution of marriage, effective immediately. Stephen Wells, the tech mogul of the year, was kicking his 8-month pregnant wife out onto the freezing streets of Aspen on Christmas Eve. He thought he had calculated every variable. He thought he was untouchable. But Stephen made one fatal error. He didn't know that the raggedy old department store Santa Claus, watching from the sidewalk, was actually the billionaire father Layla never knew she had. And he was about to buy Stephen's entire life just to burn it down. The silence in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was expensive. It was the kind of silence that costs $10,000 a square foot, the sound of triple-paned glass blocking out the howling wind of the Aspen blizzard outside. Layla sat on the edge of the oversized beige sofa, her hands resting protectively over the distinct swell of her belly. She was 8 months along. The doctors said it was a boy. She had already picked out a name, Leo. She hadn't told Stephen yet. She wanted to save it for tonight, their final Christmas alone, before they became a family of 3. She looked at the clock. It was 7:15 p.m. Stephen was late. Again. Layla shifted her back, aching. Being the wife of Stephen Wells, the CEO of Vertex Dynamics, meant you didn't complain about backaches. You smiled, you hosted galas, and you looked perfect in photos for the Wall Street Journal. But tonight, the facade felt heavy. The elevator doors chimed with a soft melodic ping. Layla brightened, struggling to stand up. Stephen. Stephen walked in, shaking the snow off his cashmere coat. He didn't look at her. He looked at his phone, typing furiously. Sienna, cancel the morning flight. I need the jet prepped for Zurich by noon tomorrow. He hung up and finally looked at his wife. His eyes were cold, like the ice forming on the terrace railing. There was no warmth, no Merry Christmas, no hand on her stomach to feel the baby kick. You're home, Layla said, trying to keep her voice steady. I asked Chef Henri to make that roast you like. And I have a present. Sit down, Layla, Stephen said. His voice was flat, transactional. He walked over to the marble kitchen island, poured himself a glass of scotch, neat, no ice, and didn't offer her anything, not even water. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the marble. It stopped right in front of her. What is this? Layla asked, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. Tickets. Open it. Layla's fingers trembled as she undid the clasp. She pulled out the document. The header was bold and undeniable, petition for dissolution of marriage. The room spun. Stephen, is this a joke? I don't joke about legal matters, Layla, he said, taking a sip of his drink. My lawyers filed it this morning. I wanted to give you the courtesy of telling you personally before the process servers arrive. Courtesy, Layla screamed, the shock turning into a sharp, hot panic. I'm 8 months pregnant, Stephen. It's Christmas Eve. Why? Stephen sighed, leaning against the counter, looking bored. It's a strategic realignment. My company Vertex is entering a merger phase with the Callaway Group. It's a multi-billion-dollar deal. The board feels that my image needs to be streamlined. A distracted father with a domestic life doesn't project the aggressive agility we need right now. I am not a distraction, Layla cried, tears finally spilling over. I am your wife. This is your son. It's a liability. Stephen corrected her, his voice chillingly calm. And honestly, Layla, the marriage has run its course. You were perfect for the start-up phase, sweet, supportive, decorative, but I'm in the major leagues now. I need a partner who understands power, not someone who spends all day knitting booties. He checked his watch. Sienna is waiting in the car. I'm staying at the Hotel Jarum tonight. You have 1 hour to pack your essentials and leave. Layla froze. Leave? This is my home. Technically, Stephen smirked. The prenup states that in the event of a felon, the primary residence reverts to the highest earner immediately. That's me. The prenup also states that infidelity voids your claim to alimony. Infidelity? Layla gasped. I have never looked at another man. Stephen shrugged. My security team has photos of you having lunch with your yoga instructor. It implies intimacy. It won't hold up in court forever, surely, but it will tie up your assets for about 2 years. By then, I'll be remarried. You monster, she whispered. I'm a businessman, Layla. Now please, don't make a scene. The security guards are coming up in 45 minutes to escort you out. If you're not gone, they'll remove you physically. He set his glass down, buttoned his coat, and walked toward the elevator. He paused just before the doors closed. Oh, and Layla. Don't try to use my credit cards. I cancelled them an hour ago. The doors closed. Layla stood alone in the $10 million penthouse. The Christmas tree lights twinkled mockingly in the corner. She looked down at the divorce papers, then at her stomach. I'm sorry, Leo, she sobbed, clutching her belly. I'm so sorry. She didn't pack clothes. She didn't pack jewelry. She grabbed her mother's old locket, her heavy winter coat, and walked out of the apartment before the guards could touch her. She took the service elevator down to the alleyway, stepping out into the biting cold of the Aspen night. The wind in Aspen cuts differently when you are poor. Layla had lived here for 3 years, wrapped in heated car seats and fur-lined boots, and she had never realized how violent the winter truly was. 2 hours had passed since she left the penthouse. Her phone was dead. Stephen had remotely bricked it. She had tried to use her debit card at a 24-hour pharmacy to buy water, but the terminal flashed declined. She was walking down East Cooper Avenue, the streets lined with luxury boutiques like Gucci and Prada, all glowing with warm golden holiday displays. Through the windows, she saw mannequins wearing dresses that cost more than most people made in a year. She felt a sharp cramp in her lower back. She gasped, leaning against a brick wall, her breath pluming in the air. Not now, Leo. Please, not now, she begged. She needed to sit down, but the benches were covered in snow. She stumbled toward a small park near the center of town. There was a gazebo there, usually decorated for the holidays. Sitting on the edge of the gazebo, sheltering from the wind, was a man. He looked like a disaster. He was wearing a Santa suit, but it wasn't the plush velvet kind you see in the movies. It was cheap, felt slightly too large for him. The beard was pulled down around his neck, revealing a face lined with deep wrinkles and a grey stubble that hadn't been shaved in days. He was smoking a cigar that smelled surprisingly expensive, contrasting with his ragged appearance. Layla hesitated. Stephen had always told her to avoid the riff-raff. Stephen isn't here, she reminded herself, and Stephen is the devil. She limped into the gazebo and sat on the bench opposite the Santa. She wrapped her coat tighter around her belly. The man didn't look up immediately. He took a long drag of the cigar, staring at the snow. Rough night? He asked. His voice was gravelly, like stones grinding together. But there was an accent buried underneath something refined. Perhaps British or mid-Atlantic, hidden beneath a roughness. Layla wiped her eyes. You could say that. Christmas Eve is the worst time for bad news, the man said. He finally looked at her. His eyes were startlingly blue, piercing intelligent, and completely at odds with his cheap costume. You look like you just lost a war, kid. I lost my life, Layla said, her defenses crumbling. My husband, he threw me out. Tonight. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at her stomach. He threw a pregnant woman out in 20-degree weather. He has a merger. Layla said, the absurdity of the words tasting bitter on her tongue. He said I was a liability. He cancelled my cards. I have nowhere to go. The Santa chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was dark. Business. It's always business. Men like that. They think money is a shield that protects them from consequences. He reached into a red sack sitting next to him. Layla flinched, expecting him to pull out a bottle of cheap liquor. Instead, he pulled out a thermos. Hot chocolate, he said. It's not poisoned, I promise. My name is Artie, by the way. Layla took the thermos with shaking hands. I'm Layla. Layla, Artie repeated, testing the name. He seemed to freeze for a split second, a flash of recognition crossing his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. That's a good name. Strong. She drank. It was rich, dark chocolate, piping hot. It brought a little bit of life back into her frozen limbs. So who is this husband of yours? Artie asked, leaning back and crossing his legs. Must be a big shot if he thinks he can dump a wife like garbage in this town. Stephen Wells, Layla said. Vertex Dynamics. Artie dropped his cigar. It hissed as it hit a patch of snow on the gazebo floor. Stephen Wells, Artie said slowly. The boy wonder, the tech genius. Do you know him? I know of him, Artie said. He bent down to pick up the cigar butt, his face hidden in the shadows. I know he's trying to close a deal with the Calloway Group. Rumor on the street is that old Arthur Calloway is a ghost. No one has seen him in 10 years. Stephen thinks he's dealing with a board of directors, but Calloway still holds the veto power. Layla nodded, though she didn't care about business anymore. Stephen said he needed to be single to impress the Calloway family. Apparently they are traditional, but he told me he needed to look agile. Artie snorted. Agile? That's corporate speak for ruthless. Let me tell you something, Layla. I used to be in business a long time ago. Before I put on this red suit. He gestured to his outfit. Real power isn't about agility, Artie said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding suddenly commanding. Real power is about loyalty. A man who betrays his wife while she carries his heir. That's not a man. A guy like Arthur Calloway would do business with. That's a man Calloway would crush for sport. Layla looked at this strange old man. He was shivering slightly, but his posture was straight. Why are you out here, Artie? She asked. It's Christmas Eve. Don't you have family? Artie looked away, staring out at the darkened streetlights. I made mistakes, Layla. Big ones. I chased the money just like your Stephen. I lost the only woman I ever loved because I was too busy building an empire. By the time I realized what I had done, she was gone. Died in a car accident 25 years ago. I heard she had a daughter, but I was too much of a coward to find her. I thought she was better off without a monster like me in her life. Layla felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry. My mother died in a car accident too, around the same time. I grew up in foster care. The air in the gazebo seemed to stop moving. Artie turned his head, slowly. He looked at Layla, really looked at her. He studied the curve of her jaw, the shape of her nose, the specific shade of hazel in her eyes. His hands resting on his knees, clenched into fists. "What was your mother's name?" Artie asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Sarah," Layla said softly. "Sarah Jenkins?" Artie closed his eyes. He took a long, shaky breath. When he opened them, the tears were there, glistening in the reflection of the Christmas lights. "Sarah," he whispered. "Did you know her, Sarah?" Layla asked. Artie didn't answer the question. Instead, he stood up abruptly. He dusted off his red pants. The slouch was gone. The tiredness was gone. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, imposing and energized. "Layla," Artie said, and this time his voice sounded like it could command armies. "You need a place to stay." "I have no money, Artie." "I know a place," he said, "and I have a feeling your luck is about to change. Stephen Wells thinks he's the king of this town. He thinks he can treat you like an expired contract." Artie reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Not a burner phone, but a sleek, customized satellite phone that looked more expensive than Stephen's car. "Artie, who are you?" Layla asked, shrinking back slightly. He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. "It's me," Artie said into the phone. "Bring the car, the Phantom, and call the legal team. All of them. Wake them up. I don't care that it's Christmas Eve. We're going to war." He looked down at Layla and for the first time smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. "Come on, my dear. Let's go get you some warm clothes. You have a gala to crash tomorrow." The vehicle that pulled up to the curb wasn't just a car. It was a rolling fortress of wealth. A Rolls-Royce Phantom jet black gliding silently over the snow-packed streets. The Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament seemed to cut through the freezing air like a silver blade. Layla stared. "Artie, whose car is this?" "Did you steal it?" The man in the cheap Santa suit didn't answer. A driver impeccably dressed in a dark suit, despite the hour and the holiday, stepped out and opened the rear suicide door with a gloved hand. "Mr. Calloway," the driver said, bowing slightly. "We received your signal. The team is assembling at the estate." Layla froze, 1 foot on the plush lamb's wool floor mat. "Calloway, Artie. Why did he call you Calloway?" The man sighed, the sound heavy with decades of regret. He stepped inside, offering his hand to help her in. The interior of the car smelled of aged leather and polished wood warmth enveloping them instantly. "Artie was a nickname Sarah gave me," he said softly, as the car pulled away, leaving the twinkling lights of Aspen behind and heading toward the secluded, ultra-exclusive estates on Red Mountain. "My name is Arthur Calloway." Layla pressed her back against the seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. The baby kicked hard as if sensing her adrenaline. "Arthur Calloway, the billionaire investor. The man my husband is trying to merge with. The man your husband was trying to merge with," Arthur corrected, his voice hardening. He pulled the cheap fake beard off his face, tossing it onto the floor of the Rolls-Royce like trash. Beneath it, his jaw was strong, set in grim determination. "That deal is dead. Stephen just doesn't know it yet." "I don't understand," Layla whispered, her mind reeling. "Why were you in the park dressed like that? Why did you ask about my mother?" The car turned through massive iron gates that bore a stylized sea. A sprawling mansion lit up like a castle loomed ahead. It was 10 times the size of Stephen's penthouse. Arthur didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead. "Every Christmas Eve for 25 years I wear that suit," I go to a different town, sit in the cold, and remember what it felt like when I had nothing but ambition. It's my penance. I left your mother, Sarah, because I thought I wasn't good enough. I thought poverty would kill our love. So I went out to conquer the world, promising I'd come back when I was worthy. He turned to Layla, his blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. By the time I made my first million, I hired an investigator to find her. He told me she died in a crash on icy roads. He told me there was a baby, but that the system had swallowed her up. Closed adoption records, dead ends. I have spent infinite amounts of money trying to find that child. The car stopped. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Layla, Arthur said, his voice cracking. You have her eyes. You have Sarah's eyes. Layla put a hand over her mouth, a sob escaping. The foster homes, the feeling of never belonging, the desperate need to create a perfect family with Stephen. It all crashed down on her. You're my father, she barely whispered. I am the man who failed you, Arthur said gravely. But I swear to God, and on your mother's memory, I will never fail you again. And I will never let anyone hurt you or that boy in your belly again. The door opened. Come inside, Layla. You're home. The next 4 hours were a blur of surreal opulence. Layla was whisked into a master suite larger than her entire first apartment. The bathroom featured a soaking tub carved from a single piece of amethyst. Arthur didn't let her rest long. We have work to do, he had said. While Layla showered, washing away the scent of Stephen's scotch and the aspen cold, Arthur had mobilized an army. When she emerged wrapped in a robe made of Egyptian cotton, the bedroom looked like a high-end department store had exploded inside it. Racks of gowns were wheeled in. 3 stylists, a makeup artist, and a hairdresser, all flown in via helicopter from Los Angeles on triple-time holiday pay, were waiting. What is all this? Layla asked, overwhelmed. Arthur walked in. He had showered and shaved. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, making him look like the titan of industry he was. Stephen is holding the Vertex Christmas Gala tomorrow at noon at the St. Regis, Arthur said. He thinks he's celebrating his freedom and his impending merger. We are going to crash his party. Arthur, Dad, I can't. Layla stammered the word Dad, feeling alien on her tongue. I'm 8 months pregnant. I look like a whale. I've been crying for hours. I can't face those people. They all think I'm a cheating gold digger because that's what Stephen told them. Arthur walked over and placed his hands on her shoulders. He looked at her in the towering mirror. Look at you, he commanded. You are not a victim, Layla. You are a Calloway. We don't hide. When someone tries to burn our house down, we buy the bank that holds their mortgage and evict them. He gestured to the stylists. You aren't going there as Stephen's discarded wife. You are going as my daughter, the heir to the Calloway Empire. You need armor. The stylists went to work. They massaged the tension from her face with cryoglobes. They applied makeup that highlighted her cheekbones and concealed the heartbreak in her eyes, making them look fierce instead of sad. They tried on 5 dresses. The first 4 were lovely pastel safe, the kind of dresses Stephen liked her in. Arthur shook his head. No, she's not a flower. She's fire. The head stylist nodded and pulled a garment bag from the very back of the rack. She unzipped it. It was crimson silk, a deep blood red that shimmered like liquid rubies. It was expertly tailored, designed specifically for maternity wear, hugging her pregnant form in a way that made it look powerful, almost regal rather than cumbersome. It had a dramatic off-the-shoulder neckline and a train that pooled like lava around her feet. When Layla put it on, she didn't recognize herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the meek housewife who begged Stephen for affection. She was a queen carrying a future king. Arthur stepped up behind her and placed a necklace around her neck. It was a cascade of diamonds and rubies that felt heavy and cold against her skin. "This was supposed to be your mother's wedding gift," he said softly. "Now it's yours. It's war paint, my dear. Let's go show Stephen Wells what a real liability looks like." The St. Regis Aspen Resort was glittering. The ballroom for the Vertex Dynamics Christmas Gala was decorated with enough silver and crystal to blind anyone walking in without sunglasses. It was noon on Christmas Day, and the champagne was already flowing freely. Stephen Wells stood near the center of the room, under a massive chandelier, holding a flute of Dom Perignon. He felt light, untethered. The unpleasantness with Layla the night before was already a distant memory, a piece of data he had deleted from his hard drive. Sienna, his sleek and ambitious assistant, was by his side, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. "You seem relaxed, Stephen," Roger Sterling, a board member, noted, clapping him on the back. "Ready for the Callaway merger?" "It's in the bag, Roger," Stephen said smoothly, scanning the room. "I've streamlined my personal life. The Callaway board will appreciate the dedication. Old man Arthur Callaway values focus above all else." "Have you heard from Callaway?" Roger asked. "Nobody has seen the guy in a decade. Some people think he's dead, and his lawyers are just running the show." "He'll show up to sign the papers," Stephen said arrogantly. "Everyone shows up for $10 billion. He was about to propose a toast to himself when the ambient noise in the ballroom suddenly dropped. It wasn't a gradual quieting. It was an instant, stunned silence that rippled from the massive double doors at the entrance all the way to the stage. Stephen frowned, annoyed at the interruption. He turned toward the doors. Standing in the archway framed by the snowy light from the lobby was a vision in crimson. Layla. But it wasn't the Layla he had thrown out last night. That Layla was broken, tear-stained, wearing an ugly puffer coat. This Layla was a deity. The red dress clung to her pregnant belly like a badge of honor. The diamonds around her neck caught the chandelier light and sent prisms dancing across the walls. Her hair, usually tied back in a sensible bun, to avoid annoying Stephen, tumbled around her shoulders in glossy waves. She didn't look sad. She looked furious and utterly magnificent. A murmur ran through the crowd. Cameras previously pointed at Stephen swiveled toward her. Stephen's jaw clenched. How dare she? How dare she show her face here, pregnant and defiant, trying to ruin his moment? And where did she get those diamonds? They looked real. He excused himself from Roger and Sienna and marched toward her. His face a mask of controlled rage. He met her in the middle of the dance floor, the crowd parting around them like the Red Sea. "What are you doing here?" "Layla," he hissed, keeping his voice low so the donors couldn't hear. "You're trespassing. I told you it's over. Did you steal that jewelry? I'll have you arrested." Layla looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in 3 years, she saw the smallness of him, the insecurity behind the expensive suit. "Merry Christmas, Stephen," she said, her voice clear and bell-like in the silent room. "I'm just here to return something." She reached into a small crimson clutch purse and pulled out her wedding ring. It was a large diamond, cold and flawless, just like Stephen. She dropped it into his champagne flute. It made a sharp clink against the crystal. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it to pay your legal fees." "Security!" Stephen snapped, turning to the perimeter of the room. "Get this woman out of here. She's mentally unstable." 2 large security guards started toward her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." A deep voice boomed from the doorway. The entire room turned again. A man walked in. He was older, silver-haired, carrying himself with an air of authority that made Stephen look like an intern. He was dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than Stephen's car. The older members of the board gasped. Roger Sterling dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor. "My God," someone whispered. "It's a ghost." Stephen stared. He recognized the face from old business magazines he studied in college. It was older, lined with age, but unmistakable. Arthur Calloway. Stephen breathed, his confidence evaporating instantly. Arthur walked past the security guards without acknowledging their existence. He walked straight to Layla and placed a protective arm around her shoulders. He glared at Stephen with a hatred so intense it felt like heat radiation. "Mr. Wells," Arthur said, his voice projecting to every corner of the ballroom. "You seem confused. You asked security to remove a trespasser. But you are speaking to my daughter." The gasp that went through the room sucked all the oxygen out of the air. Stephen blinked, his brain misfiring. "Daughter what?" "No, that's Layla. She's nobody. She's a foster kid from Ohio. Her name is Layla Jenkins." "Her name," Arthur corrected, his voice shaking the chandeliers, "is Layla Calloway, and she is the sole heir to the Calloway Group estate. The baby she is carrying, the baby you threw out into a blizzard last night, is my grandson." Arthur stepped forward, crowding Stephen's space. "You wanted a merger, Stephen. You wanted to know if I valued agility, I value loyalty, I value family. And you, sir, have none." Arthur pulled a document from his inside pocket. It looked suspiciously like the merger agreement Stephen had spent 2 years drafting. Arthur tore it in half, then in quarters, and let the pieces flutter to the floor around Stephen's expensive Italian shoes. "The deal is dead, Stephen. Vertex Dynamics is dead. By tomorrow morning, my team will begin acquiring a controlling interest in your company, and my first act will be to dissolve the board and fire you for gross misconduct and moral turpitude." He turned to the stunned audience. "Enjoy the champagne, everyone. It's the last thing Stephen Wells will ever buy you." Stephen stood frozen, a man watching his own execution. He looked at Layla, his eyes pleading for her to say it was a joke, a misunderstanding. Layla just smiled, a cold, dazzling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You were right about one thing last night, Stephen," she said softly. "I am going to be a liability. Your liability. Forever." The silence in the Rolls-Royce as they drove away from the St. Regis was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a bomb having just detonated. Layla leaned her head against the cool leather headrest, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the confrontation was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "You did well," Arthur said, pouring a glass of sparkling water from the car's console and handing it to her. "You held your ground. Sarah would have been proud." Layla took the glass, her fingers trembling slightly. "He looked small. I always thought he was a giant, Arthur. But standing there, he just looked like a scared little boy." "Bullies always do when you take away their toys," Arthur grunted, checking his phone. "The video of the confrontation is already trending. 3 million views in 10 minutes. The red dress is the #1 topic in the country." Layla closed her eyes. "I don't want to be famous, Dad. I just want to be safe." "You will be," Arthur promised. "But Stephen won't go quietly. A narcissist never accepts defeat. They rewrite reality until they are the victim. We need to be ready for the backlash. Arthur was right. Back at the Vertex Dynamics headquarters, Stephen Wells was not packing his bags. He was destroying his office. He swept a row of awards off his mahogany shelf, sending glass and metal crashing to the floor. Sienna, his assistant, stood by the door, clutching a tablet to her chest, looking terrified. "Get me Grant!" Stephen screamed, his face purple with rage. "Get me the entire legal team, and get me Veronica from crisis management, now!" "Grant is on the line, sir," Sienna squeaked. Stephen snatched the phone. "Grant, you saw it. You saw what that old fossil did to me." "I saw it." "Stephen." Grant's voice was calm, the voice of a lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour. "It's a disaster. The stock price has dropped 40% in an hour. The board is calling for an emergency vote of no confidence." "Stop the vote," Stephen barked, "and fix this." "She's lying. That old man is senile. Calloway has been a recluse for a decade. We can claim he's mentally incompetent. We can claim Layla manipulated him. Maybe she isn't even his daughter. She's a con artist, Grant. She conned me into marriage, and now she's conning him." "Stephen," Grant warned. "DNA tests are easy to procure. If she really is Calloway's daughter, attacking his mental state is a dangerous game. He has more money than God." "I don't care about his money," Stephen lied. "I care about my company. Listen to me. The baby is the key." There was a pause on the line. "Go on." "That child is Calloway's grandson," Stephen said, a twisted smile forming on his lips as he paced over the shattered glass. "Then that child is the heir to the Calloway fortune, and I am the father. If I have custody, I control the heir. I control the trust." "You signed away your rights in the divorce petition, Stephen. You literally called the child a liability." "I was under duress," Stephen shouted. "I was stressed. I was having a breakdown." "Spin it. Grant, I'm a loving father who was pushed away by a mentally unstable wife. She kidnapped my unborn son. I want an emergency custody order. I want full conservatorship over Layla until the baby is born. If she's Calloway's daughter, she has money. If she has money, I want half of it. The prenup works both ways, doesn't it?" Stephen hung up and turned to Sienna. "Call the Daily Chronicle," he said, smoothing back his hair and adjusting his tie. "Tell them I'm ready to give an exclusive interview. The headline should be, 'Billionaire Heartbreak, How a Gold-Digging Wife and a Crazy Old Man Stole My Company and My Child.'" The war began the next morning. Layla woke up in the master suite of the Calloway estate to the smell of fresh lilies and impending doom. When she turned on the TV, Stephen's face was plastered on every channel. He looked haggard. He had deliberately messed up his hair and worn a simple sweater instead of a suit. He sat in a chair, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "I just want my son back." "TV," Stephen sobbed to the reporter. "I tried to protect Layla. She's had mental health struggles. I filed for divorce because I thought it would shake her out of it, force her to get help. But then this man, this Calloway, swooped in. He's brainwashed her. I'm terrified for the safety of my unborn child." Layla threw the remote at the wall. It shattered. "He's lying," she screamed. "He threw me out in the snow." Arthur walked in looking grim. He was followed by a team of lawyers who looked like sharks in human suits. "We know he's lying," Arthur said calmly, "but the public loves a tragedy. He's playing the victim card." "He wants custody, Layla," one of the lawyers, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica said. "He filed an emergency motion this morning. He's claiming you are unfit to parent due to emotional instability and lack of resources. He's asking the court to grant him custody of the child immediately upon birth." "He doesn't want the baby," Layla cried, clutching her stomach. "He wants the connection to the money. He called Leo a liability." "We know," Arthur said, "but the courts move slowly, and Stephen is throwing mud to see what sticks. He's also frozen the assets of Vertex Dynamics to prevent us from acquiring it. He's trying to bleed us out." Arthur sat on the edge of the bed and took Layla's hand. "He made one mistake, though," Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with a cold, predatory light. "He challenged me in the press. He made this a public spectacle. He forgot that I own the media companies he's crying to." Arthur stood up. "Jessica released the security footage." "Which footage, sir?" "The penthouse footage," Arthur said. "The cameras inside the apartment. Stephen thinks he owns the security system, but the company that installed it, I bought them this morning. We have the cloud backups." 2 hours later, the narrative shifted violently. A video leaked online. It was grainy, black and white, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed Stephen standing in the kitchen, sipping scotch. "It's a liability," Stephen's voice sneered from the screen. "I need a partner who understands power, not someone who spends all day knitting booties. If you're not gone, they'll remove you physically." The internet exploded. The sad dad facade crumbled instantly. And Stephen Wells. A monster replaced the red dress as the top trend. But Stephen was like a cockroach. He survived the nuclear blast. That afternoon, a process server arrived at the Calloway estate gates. He wasn't allowed in, but he taped a document to the intercom box. It wasn't a custody hearing. It was a lawsuit against Layla. Stephen was suing her for paternity fraud. He was claiming in a new filing that Layla had slept with Arthur Calloway for money, that Arthur was her sugar daddy, not her father, and that the long-lost daughter story was a fabrication to steal Stephen's company. It was disgusting. It was vile. And it was enough to stress Layla to the breaking point. She was reading the headlines on her phone, "Is she his daughter or his lover?" Sick twist in Aspen drama when the pain hit. It wasn't a cramp this time. It was a tearing sensation, sharp and hot, radiating down her legs. Layla gasped, dropping the phone. "Dad?" Arthur was there in a second. "Layla, something's wrong," she whispered, her face going grey. "The baby. I can't feel him moving. And there's blood." The private medical wing of the Aspen Valley Hospital was locked down. Security guards stationed by Arthur Calloway patrolled the hallways, turning away reporters who were trying to sneak in, dressed as nurses or janitors. Inside room 402, the atmosphere was frantic. Monitors beeped with an irregular, terrifying rhythm. "Her blood pressure is spiking," Dr. Aris shouted, checking the monitors. 180 over 110. She's going into eclampsia. We need to deliver this baby now, or we lose both of them. Layla was barely conscious. The pain was a blinding white wall. She could hear voices, but they sounded like they were underwater. "Arthur," she moaned, reaching out a hand. "I'm here, sweetheart," Arthur said, gripping her hand so hard his knuckles were white. He was crying, the powerful billionaire reduced to a terrified father. "I'm right here. You're going to be okay." Don't let him take Leo," Layla whispered. "Over my dead body," Arthur growled. "Sir, you need to step out," Dr. Aris said. "We're moving to the OR for an emergency C-section. Code Blue protocols." Arthur was ushered out into the hallway. The doors swung shut, cutting him off from the only family he had left. He paced the corridor, his expensive shoes clicking on the linoleum, praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. Then the elevator pinged. Arthur turned, expecting coffee or news. Instead, the elevator doors opened to reveal Stephen Wells. Stephen was flanked by 2 police officers and his lawyer, Grant. He looked frantic, but there was a smugness in his eyes. He held a piece of paper in his hand. "Where is she?" Stephen demanded, marching toward the nurse's station. "I have a court order. I have the right to be present for the birth of my child." Arthur stopped pacing. He stood in the middle of the hallway, blocking Stephen's path. "Get out," Arthur said. His voice was low, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man who was contemplating murder. "Step aside, old man," Stephen sneered, waving the paper. "This is an emergency injunction. Judge Miller signed it an hour ago. I am the father. I have medical power of attorney if Layla is incapacitated. If she's under anesthesia, I make the decisions for the child. She is dying in there because of you." Arthur said, his hands balling into fists. "That's unfortunate," Stephen said, feigning sympathy. "But if she dies, then the baby is solely mine. And since the baby is your heir, well, we'll be seeing a lot of each other, won't we? Arthur Grandpa." Something inside Arthur snapped. The veneer of the civilized businessman vanished. The Santa Claus from the park, the man who had nothing to lose, resurfaced. Arthur didn't yell. He didn't call his lawyers. He simply stepped forward and drove his fist into Stephen's jaw. It was a solid, sickening crunch. Stephen crumbled to the floor, blood spurting from his nose. "Hey!" one of the police officers shouted, grabbing Arthur. "Sir, you're under arrest for assault." "I don't care," Arthur said, not resisting as they cuffed him. He looked down at Stephen, who was groaning on the floor, clutching his broken face. "If you take one step into that delivery room, Stephen, I will buy this hospital and have them turn off your life support." "Arrest him," Stephen gargled, spitting blood. "He's a maniac." "Take him away," Grant the lawyer said nervously. As the officers dragged Arthur toward the elevators, he shouted back at the nursing staff. "Protect her. Do not let that animal near her." The elevator doors closed, leaving Stephen on the floor, triumphant. He wiped the blood from his lip and stood up, shaky, but determined. "Grant," Stephen said, his voice nasal and thick. "Get the doctors. I want to see my son." Stephen pushed past the stunned nurses and slammed his hand against the button to open the OR doors. "Sir, you can't go in there. It's a sterile field," a nurse screamed. "I have a court order," Stephen shouted, shoving the nurse aside. He burst into the operating room. The scene was chaotic. Doctors were shouting, machines were screaming. There was blood. Too much blood. "Stephen!" Layla's weak voice drifted from the table. She was half conscious, her eyes fluttering. "I'm here, Layla," Stephen said, walking toward her, ignoring the surgeons, yelling at him to leave. He looked down at her. "I'm here to take charge. You've made a mess of this." "Get him out," Dr. Aris roared. "Security!" "I have a right," Stephen yelled. Then a sound cut through the chaos. A cry. Thin, reedy, but undeniable. The surgeon lifted a small, wriggling bundle into the air. "It's a boy," the surgeon said, relief washing over his voice. "He's small, but he's breathing." Stephen's eyes locked onto the baby, his ticket to the billions, his leverage. "Give him to me," Stephen commanded, holding out his hands. "I am the father." The surgeon hesitated, looking from the bleeding mother to the maniac in the suit. Suddenly, The heart monitor attached to Layla changed its tone. The fast beeping turned into a single, long, continuous drone. Beep, beep, beep. "We're losing her," the anesthesiologist shouted. "She's coding crash cart now." "Give me the baby," Stephen screamed, lunging forward. Dr. Aris stepped between Stephen and the child. He looked at the court order in Stephen's hand, then at the dying woman on the table. "Get the hell out of my OR," Dr. Aris said, his voice shaking with rage. "Or I will kill you myself." Security guards finally burst in, tackling Stephen. He fought them, screaming about his rights, screaming about the money, as they dragged him out of the room. The last thing Stephen saw before the doors swung shut was the doctors shocking Layla's chest, her body jolting on the table, while his son cried alone in a plastic bin. Stephen was thrown out into the hallway, right next to where his blood still stained the floor. He straightened his jacket. He touched his broken nose. "She's dying," he whispered to Grant. A slow smile spread across his bruised face. "If she dies, I win everything." The sound of the flatline was the loudest thing in the world, a singular high-pitched note that signaled the end of a universe. Inside the operating room, time fractured. Dr. Aris moved with desperate precision. "Charge to 200 clear." Layla's body jerked on the table, lifeless and pale. The heart monitor didn't change. The green line remained a flat, unwavering horizon. Again. "Charge to 270. "Come on, Layla," Dr. Aris shouted, sweat dripping from his brow. "Clear. Thump. Silence." Then a stutter on the screen. A jagged peak. Then another. Beep, beep, beep. "Sinus rhythm," the anesthesiologist breathed out, slumping against the wall. "She's back. BP is stabilizing." Dr. Aris didn't celebrate. He looked at the devastation the trauma had caused. "She's in a coma," he said quietly. "We saved her life, but we don't know if she's ever going to wake up. Get her to the ICU and put a guard on the door. No one gets in, especially not the husband." 3 days later, Arthur Calloway sat on the metal cot of the Pitkin County Jail, his tuxedo ruined, waiting. The heavy steel door clanged open, and the police captain walked in, looking pale. "Mr. Calloway," the captain said, "the charges have been dropped. Self-defense. And frankly, nobody wants to keep Arthur Calloway in a cage while his daughter fights for her life." Arthur stood up immediately. "How is she?" "Alive, but she hasn't woken up," the captain replied, unlocking the cell. "But you should know Stephen Wells has been petitioning the court every hour. He's claiming that since you were incarcerated and Layla is comatose, he is the default guardian. He's trying to take the baby today at noon." Arthur checked his watch. It was 10:00 a.m. He didn't go to the hospital to weep. He went to war. Arthur's driver took him straight to Vertex Dynamics. The hostile takeover Arthur had threatened was underway, but he needed a faster weapon. He needed a kill switch. He bypassed the terrified security guards in the lobby and took the elevator directly to the server floor. He cornered the IT director, a young man named Kevin. "Kevin," Arthur said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You can work for a man who abandoned his pregnant wife, or you can work for me. If you work for me, your salary triples starting today. I just need one thing, the deleted archives." Kevin didn't hesitate. He typed furiously, bypassing the encryption he had written himself. "I have it, Mr. Calloway." Arthur scrolled through the data. His eyes narrowed. It wasn't just infidelity or cruelty. It was federal crimes. Stephen had been cooking the books to make Vertex look solvent for the merger, embezzling $40 million from the employee pension fund to pay for his lifestyle. Arthur smiled a cold, terrifying expression. "Print it. All of it." The Pitkin County Courthouse was packed. Reporters from every major network crammed into the back, captivated by the story of the billionaire Santa and the comatose heiress. Stephen Wells sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a neck brace and a bandage over his nose, playing the victim perfectly. "Your Honor," Grant Stevens' lawyer began, "this is a simple matter of biology. My client is the father. The mother is in a persistent vegetative state. The grandfather has a history of violence. We ask for immediate full custody of the infant Leo and control over the mother's medical decisions." Judge Miller looked at Stephen. "Mr. Wells, anything to add?" Stephen stood up, wincing theatrically. "I just want to take my son home, Your Honor. I forgive Arthur for attacking me. I just want to heal this family." "Mr. Calloway," Judge Miller asked, "do you have a defense?" Arthur stood alone at the defense table. He walked to the center of the room and placed a thick stack of papers on the judge's bench. "I do not object to the father having custody," Arthur said calmly. The room gasped. Stephen's head snapped up, shock replacing his fake sadness. "I do not object," Arthur continued, his voice hardening, "provided that the father is not currently under federal indictment for securities, fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny." Stephen froze. "What is this?" Judge Miller asked, flipping through the documents. "That is the financial history of Vertex Dynamics," Arthur declared. "Mr. Wells has stolen $40 million from his own employees. It is a federal crime." Arthur turned to the back of the room. Two FBI agents in dark suits stood up. "Stephen Wells," Arthur roared, "you wanted the money, you have to earn it. But there is one more thing." Arthur pulled a remote from his pocket and pointed it at the evidence screen. "You claimed you loved her. You claimed she pushed you away." He pressed play. The grainy audio from the hospital security camera filled the silent courtroom. "Grant, she's dying. Stephen, if she dies, I win everything." The silence in the room was absolute. Stephen's face went white. "That's a deep fake. He doctored it," he screamed, scrambling to his feet. "And one last witness," Arthur announced, turning toward the heavy oak doors. The doors swung open. A collective intake of breath sucked the oxygen out of the room. Rolling in a wheelchair pushed by Dr. Aris was Layla. She was pale, weak, and wrapped in blankets, but her eyes were open. In her arms, a sleeping baby boy was swaddled in blue. "Layla," Stephen whispered, backing away as if he were seeing a ghost. You're in a coma." Layla looked at him. She didn't shout. She simply spoke into the microphone Dr. Aris held for her. "I woke up this morning, Stephen," she said, her raspy voice cutting through the air. "Dr. Aris told me everything. He told me you tried to force your way into the OR while I was dying. You didn't ask about me. You only asked for the baby." She looked down at her son. "You don't want a son, Stephen. You want an asset. But this asset is already spoken for." "Your Honor," Layla said to the judge, "I'm filing for an annulment based on fraud, and I'm filing for a restraining order." "He's already arrested," the FBI agent called out, stepping over the railing. Stephen bolted for the side exit, panic overtaking him. He made it 3 steps before the bailiff tackled him to the carpet. "Get off me! Do you know who I am?" Stephen screamed, his nose breaking for the second time in 3 days. "I am Stephen Wells. I am a billionaire." Arthur Calloway stood over him, looking down with pity. "Actually, my team just finished the acquisition of Vertex. We bought the debt. You are bankrupt, Stephen. You have nothing. Not a wife. Not a son. Not a penny." As they dragged Stephen out, kicking and screaming, the courtroom erupted into applause. Arthur bent down and kissed Layla's forehead, then touched the baby's cheek. "Let's go home, Layla." 1 year later. The Calloway estate was buried in fresh snow, but inside the fire was roaring. The Christmas tree was 20 feet tall, shimmering with vintage ornaments. Layla sat on the floor, laughing, as 1-year-old Leo tore open a box. He was a happy child, with Arthur's blue eyes and Layla's warm smile. Arthur sat in his armchair, smoking a cigar. He wasn't wearing a Santa suit this year. He didn't need to do penance anymore. He had found his redemption. Layla stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the driveway. Alongside the Rolls-Royce sat a sensible minivan. She was busy running her new foundation for single mothers. She was happy. Stephen was currently serving a 15-year sentence in a federal prison in Colorado. He spent his days writing lawsuits that nobody read. Layla turned back to her father. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she said. Arthur smiled, raising his glass. "Merry Christmas, Layla. To family." "To family," she repeated. The wind howled outside, but inside the fortress was warm. Layla Calloway was no longer a liability. She was unbreakable. Layla's story reminds us that true wealth isn't found in bank accounts. It's found in loyalty and the courage to stand up when the world tries to knock you down. Stephen Wells thought money made him invincible, but he learned the hard way that you can never truly bankrupt a person who has love on their side. Did this story keep you on the edge of your seat? If you enjoyed Layla and Arthur's victory, please smash that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching. Mark Ellison believed this dinner was his golden ticket. He was a man on the rise, his world defined by spreadsheets and stock tickers, and the exclusive La Sfera d'Oro was the ultimate symbol of his arrival. His wife Helen was just a simple, quiet accessory he dragged along an embarrassment he had to tolerate. But as he sat under the crystal chandeliers, fueled by expensive wine and a desperate need to impress, he unleashed a torrent of cruel public insults. He failed to notice the man watching from the shadows. Mark was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, because that man, the legendary owner of the entire restaurant empire, was about to call Mark's wife daughter. The Thursday of the dinner began like any other day in the meticulously curated beige and grey apartment of Mark and Helen Ellison. Mark, a man who at 34 was already losing his hair, but compensated with viciously expensive razor-sharp suits, stood at the marble kitchen island. He wasn't drinking his coffee. He was critiquing it. "Helen, this is mud," he said, pushing the porcelain mug away. "The grinder settings are clearly off. I've told you a burr grinder needs consistent calibration. It's not a toy." Helen, dressed in a simple grey knit sweater that seemed to drain the colour from her face, said nothing. She merely took the mug, her movements economical and silent, and poured the $40 a pound coffee down the drain. She had become a creature of silence. In the 5 years they had been married, her world had contracted to the dimensions of this apartment, to the precise, exacting and suffocating standards of her husband. Mark worked as a junior portfolio manager at Sterling Price Capital, a firm with a name like polished granite. He was good at his job, but he wasn't exceptional. He wasn't the Ivy League old money type that glided effortlessly up the corporate ladder. He was a grinder, a striver, a man perpetually terrified of being exposed as the middle-class Ohio native he was. He saw status as a zero-sum game, and to ensure his own rise, he had to push someone else down. The closest and safest target was always Helen. He had met her at a small cafe, the Daily Grind, where she was sketching in a notebook. She had seemed simple. Her clothes were unremarkable, her demeanor gentle and unassuming. She was beautiful in a quiet, forgettable way, or so he'd thought. She was the perfect blank canvas onto which he could project the image of a successful man. He had rescued her from what he assumed was a life of aimless bohemian poverty. He gave her this apartment, he paid for her clothes, which he picked out, and in return he expected flawless, silent adoration. What he received instead was a quiet, unshakable melancholy that he found profoundly irritating. "You are going to be ready at 7 o'clock sharp," he commanded, pulling on his trench coat. "Not 7:01, not 7:02. 7. The reservation at La Sfera d'Oro is at 8, and I will not be late because you couldn't manage a simple timeline." Helen finally looked up. Her eyes, a deep, startling shade of amber, held a flicker of something. Fear. "Mark, it's just, that place is so expensive. Are you sure we could just go to Luigi's?" Mark let out a sound of pure disgust. "Luigi's, that red-checked tablecloth slop house." "Helen, this is not one of your little animal shelter fundraisers. This is La Sfera d'Oro. I just closed the Henderson account. I deserve to be there. And as my wife, you will be there, and you will not embarrass me. Wear the black dress, the one I bought you. Not whatever that shapeless sack is." He gestured to her sweater, and without waiting for a reply, he was out the door, the deadbolt clicking shut with a sound of finality. Helen stood in the kitchen for a long time. The silence of the apartment was a living thing, heavy and cold. She went to the closet and pulled out the dress. It was a severe black sheath by a designer Mark admired. It was expensive, beautifully made, and she hated it. It felt like a uniform. She looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a ghost. Where had she gone? The girl who loved to paint, who laughed loudly, who spoke 3 languages. She had vanished, eroded day by Mark's relentless acid-drip condescension. He thought her family was poor, maybe farmers from the Midwest. He'd mocked her simple background dozens of times. "You just don't understand these things, Helen," he would say. "It's not your fault. You weren't raised with it." She had never corrected him. She had let him believe the lie. She had met him during her great escape, her attempt to live a normal life, anonymous and free from the crushing weight of her family name. She had wanted just once to be loved for who she was, not for what she was. She had found Mark, and in her desperate search for normal, she had stumbled into something far, far worse than the gilded cage she'd fled. That evening she applied her makeup with the precision of a soldier. She put on the black dress. She styled her dark hair exactly as he preferred. It pulled back in a severe, joyless chignon. When the clock read 6:59 p.m., she was standing by the door, her simple cloth coat in hand, her face a mask of placid obedience. When Mark arrived, he gave her a critical once-over. "Fine," he clipped. "You'll do. Now, for God's sake, Helen, remember the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't order for yourself. I'll handle it. And whatever you do, don't try to be interesting. Just smile and nod. Can you manage that?" "Yes, Mark," she whispered. "Good." He grabbed his keys. "Let's go. I'm not about to lose a table at La Sfera because you were daydreaming about stray cats." As they stepped into the elevator, Helen's stomach twisted. It wasn't the restaurant that scared her. She had grown up in places like La Sfera d'Oro. She wasn't scared of the cost, or the waiters, or the wine list. She was scared because La Sfera d'Oro, the golden sphere, was her father's flagship. It was the crown jewel of the Romano hospitality group. And she hadn't spoken to her father, Antonio Romano, in 5 years. The drive to the restaurant was a symphony of Mark's anxieties played out as a series of aggressive lane changes and muttered curses. He honked at a taxi that lingered too long at a yellow light. "Move, you peasant. Don't you know what a turn signal is?" He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his leased BMW, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "Did you review the file I sent you?" he snapped. Helen, startled from her own anxious thoughts, blinked. "What file?" "The file, Helen." "The one on the Harrisons, Richard Harrison, CEO of Apex Logistics. His wife, Catherine. I told you they always dine at La Sfera on Thursdays. This isn't just a celebration, it's an opportunity. If I can get 5 minutes with Harrison, just plant the seed, it could be huge." I must have missed it, Mark. I was at the shelter all day. We had a new intake. I don't care. He cut her off, his voice flat and cold. "I simply don't care about the mangy animals. I'm trying to build an empire, and you're busy wiping noses. Just be quiet. I need to focus." Helen turned her head to the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. The empire Mark was building was built on a foundation of debt and desperation. She knew because she managed their finances, a task he'd dumped on her, calling it simple housekeeping. She knew about the maxed-out credit cards, the secret loan he'd taken to cover a bad market bet. This dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a performance, a desperate gamble. They pulled up to the restaurant. La Sfera d'Oro was not flashy. It was old-world, discreet, and terrifyingly powerful. It was a converted 19th-century bank, all granite columns and massive bronze doors. There was no neon sign, just a small, burnished gold plaque that read, "Romano." A valet dressed in a sharp black uniform opened Helen's door before Mark had even put the car in park. "Good evening, madame." Mark practically threw his keys at another valet. "Be careful with it. It's a 5 Series. The valet just smiled a polite, empty smile that had seen 1,000 insecure men in leased BMWs. They walked through the bronze doors into a hushed lobby. The air itself felt different, thick with the scent of old money beeswax and a faint, complex aroma of truffles and wine. The sound was muffled, a civilized hum of quiet conversation and the distant melodic clink of heavy silver on fine porcelain. The maitre d', a tall, impossibly elegant man in a velvet smoking jacket, stood behind a century-old mahogany podium. His name was Jean-Pierre, and Helen had known him since she was a child. He used to sneak her marzipan fruits from the kitchen. He looked up as they approached. His eyes, professionally blank, swept over Mark, cataloguing his suit, his watch, his nervous energy. Then his eyes landed on Helen. For a single agonizing second, the mask of the perfect maitre d' shattered. His eyes widened. A micro-expression of shock recognition and profound confusion passed over his face. He almost said her name. Helen could see the E form on his lips. She gave him the tiniest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A desperate, silent plea. Jean-Pierre, a consummate professional, recovered in an instant. The mask was back, welded in place, but his voice when he spoke was a fraction too stiff. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Ellison," Mark said, puffing his chest out. "Mark Ellison. For 2. 8 o'clock." "Of course, Mr. Ellison." Jean-Pierre did not consult his book. He knew every reservation. "This way, please." He led them through the main dining room. It was magnificent. A 3-tiered crystal chandelier, rumored to have been taken from a Venetian palace, hung from a soaring, frescoed ceiling. Tables were spaced far apart, creating islands of privacy. The other diners were a mix of old-money families in quiet tweed and pearls, and new-money tech billionaires in $5,000, quiet luxury sweaters. Mark was practically vibrating. He spotted his target. "There they are," he hissed, grabbing Helen's elbow. "The Harrisons. We're 2 tables away. Perfect." As they were seated, Helen felt a presence. She looked toward a shadowed alcove near the kitchen entrance. A man was standing there, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the room. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a face that looked carved from Italian marble, and eyes as dark and sharp as obsidian. He wore a Brioni suit so perfectly tailored it seemed a part of him. It was her father, Antonio Romano. Their eyes met across the expanse of the dining room. Helen's heart stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her father's expression was unreadable, a block of stone. He hadn't seen her in 5 years, not since the day she'd walked out of his life, leaving a note on her pillow. She quickly dropped her gaze, her hands trembling in her lap. "What's wrong with you?" Mark hissed, opening his menu. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Don't be so provincial, Helen. Try to act like you belong." Helen couldn't speak. She just picked up her water glass, the heavy crystal cold against her trembling fingers. Her father was here. He was watching. And her husband was a ticking time bomb. This night, she realized, was not just going to be bad. It was going to be a catastrophe. The dinner began. It was less a meal and more a trial. A young waiter, nervous and starstruck, poured their water. Mark waved him away, as if he were a fly. "We'll have the San Pellegrino, the large bottle, and I'll need to see the sommelier." When the sommelier, a prim French woman named Corinne, arrived with the leather-bound wine list Mark put on a show, he swirled his empty glass, sniffed it, and then held the list up to the light, as if he were deciphering an ancient text. "I'm looking for something robust," he announced, his voice a little too loud. "A Bordeaux. Perhaps the, Chateau Pavin." He horribly mispronounced Pavie. Corinne the sommelier gave a polite, tight-lipped smile. "An excellent choice, monsieur. The Chateau Pavie is a remarkable Saint-Emilion. Very bold," she pointed. "We have the 2005. It is $2,400. Mark's blood ran cold. He had been pointing at a $240 bottle on the previous page. He tried to recover a red flush creeping up his neck. "Ah, yes. A bit young, don't you think I'll have the Malbec, the Cahors from Argentina?" "As you wish, monsieur," Corinne said, gliding away. Helen knew what Mark had done. He had tried to order a famous French wine, panicked at the price, and defaulted to a Malbec from Cahors, France, but called it Argentina to sound worldly, accidentally mixing up his regions. It was a small, clumsy mistake, but in a place like this it was a social gunshot. Mark, furious at his own error and the sommelier's polite correction, turned his simmering rage onto the only safe target he had. "This," he said, gesturing with his fork, "is what real class is, Helen. Not that cheap, sticky-floored diner you're so fond of. People here understand quality. They understand worth." Helen stayed silent, her eyes fixed on her bread plate. "Are you even listening to me?" he demanded, his voice a low hiss. "Look at you. You're sulking. We are in the finest restaurant in the city, an establishment you could never have dreamed of entering, and you're sulking. I'm not sulking, Mark. I'm just taking it in. Taking it in. You look like a lost puppy. Straighten your back. For God's sake, at least pretend you have some breeding. From the corner of her eye, Helen saw him. Her father. He was no longer in the alcove. He was circulating, moving from table to table, a quiet word here, a nod there. He was the conductor of this magnificent orchestra. He hadn't come near their table, but Helen felt his presence like a change in the atmospheric pressure. He knew she was here. He was watching. He was waiting. The first course arrived, a delicate, seared scallop on a bed of parsnip puree. Mark devoured his in 2 bites. Helen, her appetite gone, picked at hers. What's wrong? Is the food too complicated for you? Mark sneered. I'm sorry they don't have chicken nuggets. You can't just nibble, Helen. You look weak. It's unattractive. He refilled his wine glass. The alcohol was loosening his already thin filter. He looked over at the Harrisons' table. Richard Harrison, the CEO, was laughing at something his wife said. This was Mark's moment. I'm going to go. Pay my respects, he said, standing up and adjusting his tie. Mark, don't. Helen whispered a genuine plea. They're in the middle of their meal. It's not the time. What would you know about the time? He snapped. What would you know about networking, about ambition? Your biggest ambition for the day is deciding which sad-eyed dog to pet. You stay here, and try not to spill anything. He walked over to the Harrisons' table. Helen watched in horror. It was a car crash in slow motion. Mark was too loud. His gestures were too broad. She saw Richard Harrison's polite smile become fixed, then strained. Mark was trying to give him a business card. Catherine Harrison, his wife, was looking at Mark with open, undisguised annoyance. After a brutal 2-minute monologue from Mark, Richard Harrison finally clapped him on the shoulder in a clear gesture of dismissal. Mark returned to the table, his face a mask of thunder. He was humiliated. He had been brushed off. He said he's not interested in new portfolios right now. Mark mumbled, slumping into his chair. It's okay, Mark, Helen said softly, trying to soothe him. He was with his wife. Don't, Mark seethed. Don't you dare. It's okay, Mark, This is your fault. My fault how? Your energy, he spat, searching for a target. Your negative, mousy, poor energy. It's dragging me down. I'm sitting here trying to make us a better life, and I'm shackled to a woman who probably thinks escargot is a type of car. The main courses arrived. Mark had ordered the $150 Wagyu steak. Helen, a vegetarian, had the risotto. Mark took a bite of his steak. Incredible. He sighed, his mood shifting slightly. He looked at Helen's plate. Risotto. Rice and mushrooms. How pathetic. It's peasant food, Helen. You can take the girl out of the trailer park, but you can't, as they say. He was getting louder. The couple at the table next to them, an older pair, glanced over with disapproval. This was it, the main event, the crescendo of his humiliation. He had failed to impress the Harrisons. He had been subtly insulted by the sommelier, and now he needed to re-establish his dominance. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, cruel whisper that was paradoxically loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. You know, Helen, I've tried. I really have. I tried to polish you up. I bought you clothes, I taught you which fork to use. But you're just hopeless. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Mark, please. Stop it. You're drunk." "I'm not drunk," he declared, his voice rising to a sharp bark. "I'm enlightened. I'm sitting here looking at you, and I'm finally realizing the truth. I married down Helen. I married so far down I'm practically at sea level." The nearby tables went silent. The clinking of silver stopped. Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', froze his eyes wide, looking toward the alcove. "Mark," Helen whispered, her voice trembling. "You are making a scene." "Am I?" Mark said, a wild, reckless light in his eyes. He was enjoying the audience. "Or am I just speaking the truth? What would you know about it? Your family are probably turnip farmers from... where was it? Some god-forsaken patch of dirt in Ohio. You sit there in a dress that costs more than your entire family's yearly income, and you dare to tell me to be quiet." He threw his napkin onto his plate. "Just sit there and look pretty, Helen. It's the one thing you're supposed to be good at, and you can't even manage that." The silence in the restaurant was no longer polite. It was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Helen was frozen, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, a silent statue of humiliation. Mark looked around, a king on a temporary, pathetic throne, and then a shadow fell over the table. The shadow was tall and broad. Mark, annoyed at the interruption, looked up, ready to wave away another waiter. It was not a waiter. It was Antonio Romano. He stood beside their table, his hands clasped behind his back. He was not looking at Mark. His entire formidable presence was focused on Helen. His face, which had been a mask of stone earlier, was now etched with a profound, aching sadness. He looked at the tear track on her cheek, and his expression hardened. A cold, controlled fury surfaced in his dark eyes, like a glacier carving into a frozen sea. Mark, realizing who this was, scrambled to his feet. His chair screeched backward on the marble floor, a sound that cut through the silence like a scream. Mr. Romano." Mark sputtered, his face instantly slick with sweat. The bravado of 30 seconds ago evaporated, leaving behind the terrified, striving boy from Ohio. "Sir, what an honor, a true honor. I'm Mark Ellison, Sterling Price Capital. My wife and I were just enjoying this magnificent steak. Truly. My compliments to you, I guess." He let out a short, high-pitched laugh that died in his throat. Antonio Romano did not acknowledge him. He did not turn. He did not even blink. He continued to gaze at Helen, his voice low and heavy, but carrying across the silent room. It was thick with the Italian accent he never bothered to lose. "Helen," he said. Helen flinched as if struck. She slowly, agonizingly lifted her head. Her tear-filled amber eyes met her father's. "Helen," he said again, softer this time. "Figlia mia." "My daughter." He reached out a large, ringed hand and gently, almost reverently, brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking with a pain that silenced the entire restaurant. "Why didn't you tell me you were here? Why are you letting this verme speak to you this way?" Mark's world tilted. The blood rushed from his head, replaced by a roaring, static white noise. "Daughter Figlia mia!" He looked from Antonio, the legend, the billionaire, the man who owned this city, to Helen, his mousy, simple, trailer park wife. And for the first time, he saw her. He saw the identical proud set of her jaw. He saw the same dark, intelligent, obsidian-flecked eyes. He saw the high cheekbones and the noble line of her nose. She wasn't a forgettably pretty girl. She was Helen Romano, and she was a mirror of the man standing beside her. It wasn't a nickname. It wasn't a mistake. "Papa," Helen whispered, and the word shattered the last of Mark's denial. She reached up and grasped her father's hand. Antonio Romano's gaze finally shifted to Mark. It was not the hot, explosive anger Mark might have expected. It was something far, far worse. It was the arctic, cold, dismissive gaze of a god swatting at an insect. It was the look of pure, concentrated power. "You," Antonio said. The single word was an indictment. "You are the man who married my Helen." Mark's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He was choking on his own ambition. I, Mr. Romano. Sir, there has been a terrible misunderstanding." "No," Antonio said, his voice flat. "There is no misunderstanding. I have been watching. I have heard enough. I have heard everything." Mark looked around wildly. The Harrisons were staring Richard Harrison's face, a mask of utter contempt. The old couple at the next table were looking at him as if he were something they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. He was not just a guest. He was a pariah. "Helen, tell him," Mark pleaded, turning to his wife. "Tell him it was a joke. It was just banter. Tell him I love you." Helen looked at him, and the woman he saw was not the one he'd left the apartment with. The mousy, broken wife was gone. In her place was a woman of ice and fire. The mask of the simple girl had melted away, revealing the Romano heiress beneath. "No, Mark," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with an authority he had never heard. "No more." Antonio Romano raised one hand, a subtle gesture. Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', was instantly at his side, along with two other men. They were not waiters. They were large, impeccably dressed, and wore earpieces. They were Antonio's personal security. "Jean-Pierre," Antonio said, his voice quiet but final. "Bring Mr. Ellison his coat. His meal is finished." "No," Mark shrieked, panic overriding his paralysis. "You can't. Helen, you can't let him do this. This is my life, the Harrison account. I'll be ruined." "You were ruined," Antonio said, his voice like chipped granite, "the moment you raised your voice to my daughter." The two security men took Mark by the elbows. They were not rough, but their grip was non-negotiable. My steak. I didn't even—" Mark stammered, his mind short-circuiting. "The steak is on the house," Antonio said dismissively. "Now get this thing out of my restaurant." "Helen! Helen!" Mark yelled as they began to walk him, then drag him towards the door. But Helen had already turned her back on him. She was crying into her father's chest, her shoulders shaking as 5 years of pain, fear, and silence finally broke free. The last thing Mark Ellison saw before he was thrown out of the bronze doors and onto the cold, unforgiving sidewalk was the sight of Antonio Romano, the king of La Sfera d'Oro, holding his daughter as if she were the only precious thing in the world. The restaurant remained hushed. Antonio led a trembling Helen away from the table, guiding her through a discreet door marked private that Mark had never even noticed. It led into a study that was more like a command center. Dark mahogany walls were lined with books. A large desk sat in the center, and one wall was a bank of security monitors, showing every angle of the dining room. Antonio sat her down on a plush leather sofa and barked a request into an intercom. Coffee. Brandy. Now. He sat opposite her, not as the titan of industry, but as a father. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions, fury, relief, and a devastating, bottomless guilt. "Why?" he asked again, his voice raw. "Helen, my heart, il mio cuore. Why this? Why him?" Helen was quiet for a long moment, sipping the brandy a waiter had brought with silent speed. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the bone-deep chill. "Because he wasn't you, Papa," she finally said, her voice small. Antonio recoiled as if she had slapped him. "He wasn't you," she continued, finding her strength. "He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, he wasn't smart. He was just a man. A normal, striving, ambitious man. And he didn't want Helen Romano. He wanted Helen Vance, a quiet girl he met in a coffee shop. This was her story, her great escape. 5 years ago, Helen Romano had been the most coveted and most suffocated heiress in the city. Her father, made paranoid by his own wealth, saw every man as a predator, a gold digger. He was loving, but his love was a fortress. There had been David, a curator at the museum. Helen thought she loved him. He was kind, he was smart, he made her laugh. But one day her father had sat her down in this very office and presented a dossier, a file compiled by his private investigators. David was in deep gambling debt. He had been feeding information about the Romano family to a tabloid. Helen was heartbroken. It wasn't the first time. Her father had destroyed every relationship she'd ever had. "I am protecting you, Helen," he had thundered. "They don't love you. They love this." He had gestured to the restaurant, the Empire. "And how will I ever know?" she had screamed back at him. "How will I ever find someone who just loves me?" When you're standing in the way, shining a spotlight on the money. That night she had packed a bag. She accessed a small trust fund her grandmother had left her, one her father didn't control. She changed her last name to Vance, her mother's maiden name. She got a small, simple apartment, started volunteering at the animal shelter, and for the first time in her life, she was anonymous. 2 months later, Mark Ellison had sat down at her table at the daily grind. He seemed so normal. She wept, the story pouring out of her. He was stressed about his job. He complained about his car. He didn't know a thing about art, and he thought vintage just meant old. He was simple, and he liked me, the me I was pretending to be. I was so desperate to be loved for myself that I fell for the first man who didn't know my last name. But that animal, Antonio growled, the fury returning. That thing he said to you at the table, how long? It started small, Helen admitted, ashamed. A little comment about my clothes, a criticism of my friends from the shelter. Then he suggested I quit. He said it was unseemly. Then he just started chipping away at me. Papa, he called me stupid. He told me I was lucky he saved me. He isolated me, and I was too proud to come home. I was too ashamed to admit that my great escape was a failure, that I had run from your gilded cage just to lock myself in his. I thought I had made my bed. I thought I had to lie in it. Antonio's face was pale. You are a Romano. You are my blood. You are the only good thing I have ever built. And you thought I would rather you be miserable than be safe. You thought my pride was more important than you. He knelt before her, a move that would have shocked the financial world. The great Antonio Romano on his knees, he took both her hands. "Helen, I was a fool," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I was so obsessed with protecting my legacy, I forgot to protect my daughter. I drove you away. I drove you to him. I saw only the gold diggers, and I was blind to the monster. Perdona-me. Forgive me." "Oh, Papa," she cried, and they held each other, a father and daughter healing a 5-year wound in the heart of their empire. After a few minutes, Antonio's demeanor shifted. The father receded, and the CEO returned, but this time his focus was singular. He stood up and went to his desk. "This, Mark Ellison," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "He is an asset manager at Sterling Price Capital." Helen nodded. "A junior manager." Antonio picked up his phone. He didn't dial. He spoke to his assistant. "Get me Robert Sterling. At his home. Yes, I know it's 9 p.m. Get him, and while you're at it, get me the name of the top divorce attorney in this city, the most vicious one we have." He looked at Helen, his eyes now clear and hard. "You are my daughter, Helen. You are an heiress. But more than that, you are a Romano. And we do not tolerate parasites." Mark landed hard on the granite sidewalk. The bronze doors of La Sfera d'Oro slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing in the quiet, wealthy street. For a moment he just stood there, dazed, his mind a scramble of stake stock tickers and the horrifying image of Antonio Romano's face. This isn't happening," he muttered. He straightened his $2,000 suit jacket, which was now wrinkled from the security guard's grip. "This is a nightmare." He fumbled for his phone. He had to call Helen. He had to fix this. He'd apologize. He'd beg. He'd threaten her. He'd tell her. What could he possibly threaten her with? The simple poor wife was a lie. He was the simple poor one. He dialed her number. It rang once, then went to voicemail. "Helen, pick up the phone." You can't just... This is insane. You call me back." "You hear me? You call me back right now." He tried again. The call didn't even go through. It went straight to a "This number is not in service" recording. Blocked. A cold, sharp panic, far colder than the October night air, seized him. He looked up. The Harrisons. His career. He had to get ahead of this. He had to call his boss, explain. Something. He dialed his boss's number. Voicemail. He hailed a cab, his hands shaking so violently he could barely get his wallet out. 22nd and Park, he barked. Their apartment, his apartment. He had to get to her. She couldn't lock him out. As the cab sped through the city, his phone buzzed. A text. From his boss. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow, Mark, or ever. We'll mail you your things." "No," Mark whispered. No. He tried to call. The number was blocked. He tried to email. His corporate account was already deactivated. Access denied. Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Price Capital, was one of Antonio Romano's oldest friends. They played golf together every Sunday. The phone call from Antonio had lasted less than 60 seconds. That was all it took to end Mark's career. He stumbled out of the cab and ran to his apartment building. The doorman, who usually greeted him with a "Good evening, Mr. Ellison," stepped in front of him, his face impassive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. I can't let you up." "What are you talking about, Charles? It's my apartment. Get out of my way." "My instructions are clear, sir. You are not to be admitted to the premises." "Instructions from who from?" "Helen." She can't do that. The lease is in my name. The lease, sir, Charles said, his voice flat, is on a building owned by a subsidiary of the Romano Hospitality Group. We were informed there is a new primary leaseholder, Mrs. Ellison, or rather, Miss Romano. Now please, sir, or I'll have to call the police. Mark backed away, his mind imploding. The building. He had lived here for 5 years. He'd chosen this building himself. He'd told Helen he got a great deal on it. He never knew. She had let him pretend. He looked up at the 14th floor window at his lights, his life. It was all a sham. He hadn't rescued her. She had been curating him. A black car pulled up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit, not a security guard, but a lawyer, stepped out. Mr. Mark Ellison. Who are you? Mark spat. My name is Daniel Weiss. I represent Helen Romano. He handed Mark a thick manila envelope. You have just been served. Mark ripped it open. His eyes scanned the words. Dissolution of marriage. Restraining order. Temporary. Immediate eviction. You can't, Mark breathed. The assets, our accounts, my money. What money, Mr. Ellison? Weiss asked, his voice smooth as silk. According to our preliminary review, your personal accounts are significantly leveraged. The credit cards you've been using are in fact part of a supplemental corporate account for the Romano Group, which your wife graciously let you believe was your own. That line of credit has been terminated. Mark's blood turned to ice. The BMW, the suits, the dinner. There is, however, the lawyer continued, the matter of the prenuptial agreement. Mark's heart leapt. The prenup. He had insisted on it. Mark Ellison, the finance guy, had insisted on a prenup to protect his future earnings from the simple girl with no prospects. He remembered the clause, all assets acquired prior to the marriage, and any assets derived from familiar inheritance shall remain the sole property of the individual. He had signed it smugly, thinking he was protecting himself from her. He looked at the lawyer, a tiny, desperate shred of hope in his eyes. The lawyer smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Ms. Romano is, of course, prepared to honor that agreement fully. She will keep her assets. And you, Mr. Ellison, may keep yours. Good evening. Daniel Weiss got back in the car and drove away, leaving Mark Ellison standing on the sidewalk holding a useless stack of papers, a man with nothing but the suit on his back and a life that had just been deleted. While Mark was imploding on the sidewalk, Helen was in her father's study, a team of lawyers and assistants moving around her. The mousy wife was gone. In her place was a CEO in waiting. She was sharp, decisive, and focused. The apartment is secure, Daniel Weiss said, re-entering the study. He's been served. Good, Helen said, and the accounts frozen. Antonio said, a dark satisfaction in his voice. The lease on his car is terminated. His firm has let him go. He is, as of this moment, a man with no job, no car, and no home. Helen nodded, but she felt no pleasure, just a cold, empty relief. The relief of a limb being amputated to stop a spreading poison. Papa, she said, turning to him, what he did, he was cruel. He was a monster. But I let him be. Helen, no, Antonio started. Yes, she insisted. I hid. I hid from you, I hid from my name, and I hid from myself. I let him shrink me down because I was afraid to be big. I was so afraid of being Helen Romano, the heiress, that I let him convince me I was Helen Ellison, the The nothing. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down on the city lights. He called me stupid papa for 5 years, and the woman who speaks 3 languages and has a degree in art history from Yale. I believed him. That is what abusers do, tesoro mio, Antonio said gently. They isolate. They diminish. It is not your fault. It's not my fault, she agreed, but it is my responsibility to fix it. I ran away from this. She gestured around the opulent room. I ran away from the Romano name because I thought it was a prison, but I was wrong. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a new hard-won fire. This name isn't a prison, Papa. It's a weapon, and I've let it rust. I let a man like Mark Ellison hurt me, and I had all this power at my fingertips and refused to use it. Antonio watched his daughter, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. The girl who had run away was gone. A woman had returned. A queen. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to come home, she said, but not to the guest room. I want an office. I want to work. Antonio smiled. The Romano Foundation, the philanthropic arm, your mother. She always wanted you to run it. It's been sitting waiting for you. The foundation, Helen said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Mark, he always hated my volunteer work. He said it was beneath me. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh. He had no idea. He thought he was up here, and I was down there. He never realized he wasn't even in the building. She looked at her father. I want to focus the foundation on domestic abuse, on shelters for women and children who have nowhere to run, for women who don't have a billionaire father to call. Antonio Romano put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Then that, he said, is what we will do. Welcome home, Helen. 6 months passed. The chill of that October night had given way to the damp, burgeoning heat of a New York spring. But Mark Ellison wasn't in New York. He was in Des Moines, Iowa. He now called himself Mark Hill. Ellison was a name so toxic it was radioactive. The story of the husband at La Sfera had become a quiet, vicious legend on Wall Street, a cautionary tale whispered over $30 cocktails. He was not just fired, he was blacklisted, excommunicated. No firm would touch him. His name was a synonym for career suicide. The lawsuits had been swift. The debts he'd hidden, the ones Helen had known about all along, were called in. The Romano legal team had advanced him the money to pay them an act he first mistook for mercy. But it was not mercy. It was a tactical move. He was no longer in debt to a dozen faceless banks. He was in debt to one entity, the Romano Group, and they were garnishing his wages. He had pawned his watch. He had sold his cufflinks. He had fled New York on a midnight bus landing in the first city that felt far enough away. His new life was a shade of beige so bleak it made his old apartment look like a carnival. He lived in a 300-square-foot studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat. The air perpetually smelled of warm bleach and mildew, and the flashing pink and blue neon "open" sign was the only light he had after dark. He worked in a sprawling, windowless cubicle farm for a third-party logistics company. His portfolio was gone. He now managed shipping manifests. His job for 8 agonizing hours a day was to cross-reference invoices for pallets of kitty litter and paper towels. The irony was a constant, dull-edged knife in his gut. He who had mocked her for caring about stray animals now tracked the supplies for them. It was a Friday night. He was in a brightly lit, sterile supermarket called Heartland Grocers. His basket contained a single frozen lasagna, a generic brand six-pack of beer, and a bar of soap. He was at the checkout, his eyes glazed when he saw it. On the magazine rack between Angler's Weekly and Good Housekeeping was the cover of Forbes, and on the cover was Helen. He stopped breathing. It wasn't the mousy, quiet woman he had bullied. It wasn't the terrified girl in the black dress. The woman on the cover was a stranger. Her dark hair was cut in a severe, stylish, and impossibly chic bob. She was wearing a crimson suit that looked like it had been sculpted from a block of pure, confident power. Her amber eyes, once downcast, now stared directly into the camera, and they were not just intelligent. They were dangerous. He snatched the magazine, his hands trembling. The headline blazed in bold white letters. The New Face of Philanthropy. Helen Romano. How the heiress reclaimed her name and built a new empire of hope. He stumbled out of the line, leaving his basket behind, and tore the magazine open. The article was a 10-page spread. It detailed the Helen's Haven initiative. In just 6 months, she had leveraged her father's capital and her own ferocious intelligence to build and open 3 state-of-the-art women's shelters, with 2 more under construction. She hadn't just thrown money at a problem. She had rebuilt the entire system from the ground up, incorporating legal aid job training and psychological counseling. He read a quote from the mayor of New York. Helen Romano doesn't just ask for change. She arrives with a binder, a team of lawyers, and a non-negotiable timeline. She's the most effective force in this city. He kept reading, his blood turning to ice. Many were surprised by Ms. Romano's sudden aggressive entry into the public sphere, the article read. For years, she was famously private, dedicating her time to anonymous volunteer work at local animal shelters. Then came the paragraph that stopped his heart. Ms. Romano is herself a survivor. Her new passion, friends say, was forged in the fires of a brief, unfortunate first marriage to a man who, sources say, spectacularly and publicly underestimated his wife. When asked about this difficult period, Ms. Romano is diplomatic but clear. We often think of abuse as something physical, she told us from her Park Avenue office. But the most insidious kind is the one that convinces you that you are worthless. It's the voice that tells you you're stupid, that you're less. My new mission is to give women their voices back and to silence the voice that tells them to stay small. The article didn't even mention his name. He wasn't a person. He wasn't a villain. He was an experience, an it, a voice. He was a footnote, a catalyst, a bad memory she had already metabolized into rocket fuel. He dropped the magazine onto the linoleum floor. The unfortunate first marriage, the experience. He had spent 5 years trying to climb a ladder to be someone. He had clawed his way into La Sfera d'Oro, the pinnacle of his world, only to find out the mousy, worthless girl he'd been kicking at his feet had owned the entire mountain. He stumbled out of the store, the cold, damp air hitting his face. He didn't just lose a wife. He didn't just lose a job. He had been holding the winning lottery ticket for the entire world, and he had set it on fire just to watch it burn. He finally understood Antonio Romano's final word, to him verme, worm. He had been a parasite, and the host had finally and calmly brushed him off. Miles away in her new corner office, overlooking Central Park, Helen Romano finished a presentation. The Helen's Haven project was officially going national. The boardroom was filled with lawyers, city planners and investors, all of whom hung on her every word. "The projections are clear," she said, her voice crisp and commanding, echoing in the quiet room. "Phase 2 will see us breaking ground in Chicago and Los Angeles by the fourth quarter. I want the legal framework finalized by June. Questions?" A hand went up. "Ms. Romano, the timeline is aggressive." Helen smiled. It was a small, sharp, confident expression. "Aggression is what's required. These women don't have time for us to be polite. We get this done. Next." Her father Antonio sat at the far end of the table. He was not Papa. He was Mr. Romano, a board member. And he was beaming. He watched his daughter command the room, a woman reborn. This was his legacy. Not the steel and glass, but the fire and will he saw in his daughter's eyes. The meeting adjourned. The room emptied, leaving just Helen and Antonio. "You were good, figlia mia," he said, walking over. "No, you were better than good. You were—" "I was better than you," Helen teased, packing her briefcase. "You would have yelled. I just used the data." He laughed, a full, genuine sound. "This is what you were made for, Helen. Not that." He didn't have to say Mark's name. Helen paused, zipping the bag. She looked out the window at the city spread out below her, a kingdom she had once run from and now intended to rule. "He did one good thing for me, Papa," she said quietly. "He did nothing." "No, he did," she insisted, turning to face him. "He spent 5 years trying to make me Saul. He tried to break me down, to make me into nothing." She picked up her briefcase, her posture perfect. "He failed, and in doing so he showed me exactly how strong I am. You can't know you're unbreakable until someone tries to break you." She kissed her father on the cheek. "I have another meeting. Don't wait up." He watched her walk out. She was no longer Helen Vance, the runaway. She was no longer Helen Ellison, the victim. She was Helen Romano, the head of the Romano Foundation. And she was just getting started. The fall of Mark Ellison was as swift as it was complete, a perfect example of what happens when arrogance meets a truth it cannot comprehend. And the rise of Helen Romano is a powerful lesson. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. She didn't need a prince to save her. She just needed to remember she was already a queen. What did you think of Mark's devastating, career-ending mistake? Do you think Helen should have revealed her secret to him sooner, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments section below. We read every single one. If you love stories about secret identities, shocking twists and righteous justice, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit share and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story. Thank you for listening.